Well, good day. We start our roundtable dedicated to safe development as the essential part of digitalization. At least that's the subject. My name is Denis Koravlev. I'll be moderating discussion, participating in discussion because I care about the subject. So, why I care? My company, I do development, and I'm in charge of promotion of 5 or 7 products. It's hard to count, and also particularly application security products that are made to provide safe development. We also software developers, and we have specific approach. I really want to listen to my colleagues and find out how this works for them. Also, we have the joint concept for IT security, and somehow it just enters into. We have our own opinion, but it's not the only point of view that's out there. So when the colleagues will be able to tell about their approach, I think it will be very useful to us as well. I'd also would like to introduce the host of the roundtable in a stage company. It helped us to invite the guests and put together the agenda. And we see synergy in working with them. And we see a cool company that has enough experience in developing business solutions. I think we'll discuss the subject of this sort of development with them. But it's really important to share opinions and to understand how the problem was solved successfully by our colleagues. And maybe also talk about how we discuss this particular problem. So question one that I wanted to begin with is the issue on why we need secure development whatsoever. What could be the risks if we don't do that? And how should we evaluate the success and efficiency? And I would like to first introduce my colleagues and ask them to tell briefly about what they do in their companies and answer the question, therefore. Denis, good day.
Меня зовут Ольга Толстунова. Я представляю «Атомстройэкспорт».
My name is Olga Tolstunova, Atomstroyexpert, the branch of Rosatom. We're in charge of building nuclear stations globally. In Russia and 14 countries, we're building nuclear power plants at the moment. Why IT security for us is in addition to the energy block, we also deliver the digital model for the power plant, the digital twin, in addition to the power plant as well. So we have our own platform of development, multi-D it's called. Probably I will not particularly make the question too urgent, because you understand that the dossier of the nuclear power plant must not be available to anybody. That could definitely do something. We have our own development for security. On a regular basis, we are hosting certifications, and today I'm very interested to listen to the participants of the discussion to find out how they organize the process and how they support security. Anybody else wants to answer the question? Good day. I am the executive director for Sberbank Security, and I'm particularly in charge of development. Let me make the asterisks. I'm not talking small asterisks, a small disclaimer. I'm not talking about all of the security, because the security in Sberbank is a very multi-branch domain. We're specifically talking about safe development. development. That is the approach, that is technology, this is the set of processes that are particularly related to production of code and software used by our clients in our back office. This is the particular speciality that I can can talk about. Good day. My name is Pavel Igis. I am the CEO of the program called Open Mobile Platform. It develops OS solutions for mobile system. The OS is called Aurora. Our approach to safe development is probably different compared to what my colleagues were talking about, because we produce OS systems and services around. So it's not that we only must provide safe process of development of the OS. It also makes a very strong impact on apps. And we are highly dependent on what processes of secure development are being used by our hardware partners. That is why we are in a precarious situation. I'd be happy to share. Thank you. Hi, colleagues. My name is Nikolai from Gazi Inform Service. GIS. Don't confuse with Tugis. I'm the representative of vendor and system integrator. So, we've been in this domain for about 10 years, specializing on SAP apps first, protecting SAP apps. You probably know what it is if you've been there. Above Java, now 1S, Russian solution. This is the thing that we've been doing. No objective, but a journey, like with Samurai. As a CTO, I'm also in charge of R&D in my company, and therefore, I am especially interested in the experience of how we are doing safe development, secure development of our very own products. Hello, my name is Vyacheslav Yashkin. I represent Akbar's Bank. We have our own development for databases, anti-fraud, our own biometric engine, and we also have info security self-service. I would like to share experience. We have 3 interactions on changing the theme of development. Also, we have remote banking. We've just been studying biometrics. I think we'll get there today if we have enough time. But the first thing that I wanted to find out with you is if there is any measurable way to find out whether development is actually secure. I mean, we've integrated it, it does work, we make it better. Or this is an endless journey. Let me answer the question. Overall, I believe we can never say that there are no risks. It's like an idea of the superhuman. You can only try to achieve it. I believe that today every company is similar in its approach. I mean, there are always a threat model, a number of risks, and therefore it is possible to highlight the risks that are unacceptable. And of course, the company tries to avoid those in the first place. So that the company protects the most sensitive areas. Otherwise, the measurable ways are, again, we can do static and dynamic analysis of the code, always, and other certified events. But still, we can never say that there are no threats whatsoever. It's impossible. Maybe other participants have a different opinion, but let's listen to them, I guess. Well, it's impossible to prevent everything, obviously, and it's hard to measure it because we have been working with different sorts of threats, and before we integrated them, it was more or less fine. We were developing apps and releasing them. Now we pay attention to that because potentially we do understand that we have some areas that have not been covered. I'd like to look at the problem from a different standpoint. Safe development is more of a need, a necessity, because this is the set of practices that allows us to automate processes of verification and make it quickly, while business requires constant acceleration from us. They request constant automation, DevOps, conveyor, release on demand, and that's when we need to start thinking about the tech that will allow us to efficiently and in the automated way check it, because of course expertise, human factor is always an issue. But we cannot cover 800 releases per week with just labor force. So the demands are the same. We're not yet being hacked. We do not have incidents, and for us, that is, of course, a benchmark. Everything that we do inside is a sign for the production process, whether we slow or accelerate production process, how precise or imprecise our checks are. Thank you. Overall, I believe yes. It looks more or less similar in terms of methodology, because the processes for safe development are familiar in terms of methodology, and in our company, like in many others, they use similar metrics for tracking regularly. But I'd like to highlight that, just highlight generally the things that, in my opinion, are not commonplace, if I may say so. I mean, we're saying that security is a process. Secure development is an end-to-end process, right? And there are certain records to that, but one of the aspects of integration of secure development in the organization, quite unexpected, I guess. Imagine you have a team of developers. Now, imagine in current reality, that is probably the team that is fully or partially leaves the company. If you do not have safe development integrated as the methodology, I should say that you will not be able to restore anything. You will be trying to figure out that repository in an endless way. It doesn't seem to be an obvious profit, but as far as our company goes, by all means, this is metrics that we have been tracking, and there's a ton of relevant metrics to us. I believe that colleagues have a few things to add. May I ask a question? As for safe development, how does that work with legacy? How does it work with the succession, continuity? Well, you have the full record base. Almost everything has been documented. And if it's not been documented, you are vulnerable to one of the vectors of attack, which is loss of competencies for a given component. Therefore, this is more of a side effect. But I've met a number of companies which intentionally integrated safe development, particularly paying attention to this aspect. I just thought that it's quite an interesting benefit when you make things secure while being able to restore after you lose your people. That is quite interesting. Another thing that we have not been using for metrics is the aforementioned incidents, because it's hard to track. The absence of incidents could be
Ну, как бы это вы просто не знаете,
We just
например,
you
да,
just
то есть
don't
так.
know about
Мы
them. I
такой
mean,
параметр, например, не используем. А вот полноту
we're not using this
документации мы
parameter. As
используем
for
как
the
параметр. Как параметр,
breadth
ну, то
of
есть мы
documentation,
лучше
we use that
защищены.
as a parameter. We understand that we are
Прецеденты у нас
better
используются в
protected.
других моделях.
Well, as for the metrics, fortunately or unfortunately, I graduated as an engineer, so that's why I need every process to be measurable. So when we set these tasks for us, how to evaluate the quality control of the code, the frequency of the code, our metrics was the major thing. I mean, the number of lines in the code. Yes, the number of vulnerabilities per 1,000 or million lines of code. How many of that how many critical of them, how many false or true positive, false or true positive with false analysis is a huge trouble. How many of these metrics are accepted by functional developers, because static analyzing systems and code analysis are usually conducted by either representatives of the software security group, security champion, for example, or something from the security block. So he's saying, guys, your code is leaking. And you start the football. That's a normal transaction, that's a normal function, etc. It's a safe construction. That also is a metric. Next, the functional developer created a report. It returns, and after that, there's the repeated scan. How many vulnerabilities we get based on repeated scan and analysis of the code. These are all metrics which we calibrate in a way. And probably a few figures, as I have said, we start with IP systems, and for large-scale client, this is a few dozens of subsystems. So, what do you think? The amount of code lines for one IT system, how much? On average. On average. Dozens of thousands of lines, 2 or 3 million lines. I just missed it by a little bit. Exactly. 2 or 3 millions of lines of code. And at first analysis, that is about 10 or 15,000 vulnerabilities, and 20 or 30 out of them are naturally critical. If we speak about the metrics, so that you would understand what is code control for this particular system. I will not contradict the points of view of other speakers. Speed, quality, price is a major metric. If we don't speak about SLA in particular, I think you should mention the uninterrupted nature of the process, the ability to reuse what has been produced. And another important aspect, probably the fact that we can automate up to 80% of it. XAST systems, which help us to highlight certain bugs. And again, we can cut the amount of manpower that we need for that. And another important point is the theme of security awareness, education within the team, and transition of simple tools within a team, something that we need to think about at the stage of architecture and writing the code. Probably this is the set of major ideas. Colleagues, thank you. I'd like to add, as a person who also is sort of a client, meaning that we also have a company where we write a code for us, the unacceptable sort of risk is, for example, if our guide commits backdoor in our security product, leaves to the client, and something happens there. Overall, whose problem is that? Secure development or firewall and its perimeter. It's more about whether your company can look at this practice from top to bottom. I mean, we would never allow this sort of source. So what do we do? In my opinion, experience DevSecOps or safe development, we have server for version control somewhere within, and there's a perimeter to get within. So there are some systems along the line, and one of the perimeter systems can be an app that has been developed within, and that particular app and its security directly influences whether it's really possible to get to the Git or anything. And that actually is a motivation. But on the other hand, we have the systems that are only sticking within with some videos. But naturally, it doesn't matter what's happening there. It might be leaky. We have students who applied for a job, they broke it. I mean, we're happy for the guys, they're growing somehow. What I mean to say, one of the major aspects for this safe development is who actually is the functional owner of the thing, who actually needs it. Another point, what happened so that you began doing this? Who approached whom? Who is in charge? Who is paying? Who is responsible? Which people you're using? How that came to be? A few background, perhaps, maybe. If I may approach from a different angle, in our particular case, that is more of a position from the top management. There was a veto from DevSec's to stop the cycle of development if there's some sort of critics or medium even vulnerability that we cannot accept. And by the way, I would like to ask colleagues whether they have similar practice or not. Well, we began talking about DevSecOps, but personally, we began with application security, then we talked about SDLC, then we continued with DevSecOps. Honestly, I don't understand what the issue is. I mean, there's a process of continuous development. CI/CD. Okay, good for you. DevOps works. You are passing through certain quality gates, but what happens if instead of quality gate, you're getting the security gate? What's the difference there? In architecture, there is security gate, while the security expert commits before. Unless security expert commits that the code is not going into production. What's the difference? So nothing changes naturally. We get just another stakeholder on the side of security who is naturally in charge this particular flow. I don't think there's any difference, honestly. I believe, Nikolai, that I don't mean to contradict your point of view, but that security guy sometimes kind of limits the situation. The structure can just hold to the development. Yes, we've been there. The problem happens when security guys on the other side of the fence. Then it is a problem. There's a team, project office, somebody, some functional developer who actually writes the code. So that side is interested to submit the project on time. What's the risk? Reputation, etc. So the code should be pristine, but that never happens. In my opinion, just the perfectly clean, pristine code just doesn't happen. It's not even about security. We're looking at the same time at the performance, convenience, supervision, documenting of the code, lots of debugging. Question: if we're moving it from outside of the fence and saying to the person, now you're a member of the team, that actually eliminates the problem most of the time. Interesting experience. I feel like this could be a problem, but you probably tuned it up through your processes. Returning to the question of the host. The client is paying, right? There are no illusions, but the client buying the solution and solution in the end cascades the money to all of the participants, all those who participated in creating the solution. So they have the right to consider certain things. This is an interesting aspect. What does the client want? Hoping to read the business card on the website that says that there's some methodology that's been integrated for Safe development. I'm sorry for asking the audience, but maybe somebody would say, what do you count for? I mean, we're sitting here talking about it, but what do you expect? What sort of miracle do you expect while our audience is thinking about what they expect? Let me say this. Often, I mean, we're developing a number of apps on demand. Sometimes this switch on how strongly we are messing with security and what's more important, time to market or security, it can work differently. If we look from top to bottom about the organizational structure, what we're afraid of, maybe in this particular situation, we do not need safe development or need, but it's simpler. Or pen testers should look with their very own eyes at this because it's super anxious. But that could be one thing for the whole of the company.
There was a cool phrase in the standoff video that defense and a resource and it is depletable. So that's basically what I meant. Yes. It's just that we also watched the end of the previous session together, and that point about the biometric data was really fantastic. It is a display of massive cognitive dissonance. People do not trust biometric data in one case, for example, in a bank. At the same time, they do trust the biometric data on their Android smartphone. Seems weird. And here, same thing. A company that is developing applications cares about the data leak from their client, and it implements some security features, and then this application is installed on a regular mobile device, and it's good if this mobile device gets at least sometimes security updates. So this subject is quite interesting indeed, because this is all about stack, finally. It boils down to stack. And it's quite interesting to know what does the audience expect from safe development, because people came here to listen to us. Who knows what's secure development anyways? Perhaps we could start with that question. Because we mentioned many things such as biometric data, and by the way, I suggest we don't touch upon this subject because in that case we will just repeat the discussion of the previous roundtable. I think that if we're to talk about technologies that are implemented into DevSecOps, it's first of all about the code quality, it's first of all about the developer's culture. Making people think differently about that doesn't seem possible yet. We cannot train everyone. We cannot include a security champion into every team if we are talking about a larger organization. Of course, if it is a startup with 10 developers, everyone can be a security champion. But if we have a 20,000 people company, it is not possible physically. So usually there are no expectations because it's just something very new, something unheard of previously. This is just my point of view. And of course, security here acts as a tool that can bring it to masses. This is our case. Anyways, we are doing our best to develop this subject. We are financing it as well. First, it triggered some resistance, but now people do see this necessity, they do understand it, and they are ready to invest into that because people understand that it is their responsibility. So they start seeing risks, they start taking on responsibility. And here, our goal is to provide them these tools as soon as possible so that they implement them on a daily basis. I think that you said a very right thing about culture and awareness raising. We are now at the point of transition. Before, we did not know how to read or write, and now we know how to do it, and this is the new normality for us. And who resisted it? You mentioned that previously there was some resistance, and it is no more the case. Well, I think that people are just getting used. Who is getting used? I mean, developers. Developers are getting used. I'm talking about developers because they do development, and secure development is an approach, right? At the stage of design, even before the development, already at the stage of design, we do take into account the requirements that need to be implemented to avoid problems that we want to avoid. And first of all, I'm talking about architects, developers, analysts that work with the software that will later be released. Clear? Well, it depends on how everything is organized in a particular company. Because speak about Rosatom, you understand that Rosatom is not just about designing nuclear facilities. For example, there is also a huge nuclear weapons facility, and security in Rosatom is at the level of DNA of every employee. For dozens of years, this culture of security and safety was developing in Rosatom. And what is new for us, it's not security, but development. So actually, it's development that came and got integrated into the security culture. And when we started developing and doing something, no one resisted. No one even thought that it can be insecure. So, as far as I understand, you do present here and represent here the security block, but I am vice president for digitalization in Atomstroy, and we have development inside of digitalization, and the security block is close to it, and it provides assistance. It helps us to organize safe development and secure development processes. So in that sense, yes, if we talk about role distribution, without going too much into detail, performance is in development, control is in security. That's how it's organized. Well, it seems to be quite organic because the product that you are selling has to be very secure, and those who are buying it understand what they're paying for. In our case, we need to prove this value. We need to prove what makes these products so valuable. It's secure development. Yes, clear. Actually, it's interesting how differently it's organized, because it turned out that you are actually at the different ends of the table, but still you hired developers. They came from the market, and you said that you have security in your DNA. So how did you determine whether security is part of DNAs of those developers when you interview them? Or did you raise them from school? Yes, we did interviews, naturally. And also, we're always doing development for the sake of something, not just like that. At least there are requirements to the main product. You mentioned quite aptly that our customers, including foreign customers, who wants us to make an energy unit, of course the customer wants to have a secure product, and he wants security to be integrated into digital models and into systems that are transferred to that customer. So we have to respect all the security requirements at this point in time already. So developers do realize that this is in demand. Security matters, and they just have to cope with it. I agree with you. I am still writing codes, and it was quite difficult for me to fix vulnerabilities until I realized why doing so. So motivation is key. And sometimes you have to demonstrate the result Now, it's not a secret that development doesn't always take place inside the company. Sometimes it is outsourced. What's your opinion? Is there any difference in approaches and in processes depending on whether development takes place inside the company or is outsourced? I can speak for myself. We do have external developers, we have freelancers, and we are trying to work with those with whom we already have relations. We are not just taking a random developer on the market and we conclude a contract and there are certain requirements written there. If it is something very new, such as sandbox development that is not at all related to prod, then we may be looking for such outsourcers. If we are talking about our prod, we usually use our internal developers. The question was not about how to select contractors, but about the secure development processes as it is. I mean, you have to provide them your repository accounts, and you can also include the necessity for a secure development into the terms of reference for a particular contractor. Are you trying to scale up what you are doing to those with whom you work on a freelance basis? So is it a question about the tools that we are using? Yes, and about methodology, because it turned out that these do not always overlap. Well, if we take methodology, we use the same methodology with freelancers. As for tools, they have to be validated by us. So speaking simply, if it is outsourced development, we have to approve of their tools. Thank you. Let me try to answer this question as well. So we are a product developer. I would like to consider the vendor side. So we do develop software, including elements of software security. And I guess that we are all in a more or less same situation. The process is somewhat regulated. And it doesn't matter whether you based upon Microsoft model or any other model, or perhaps you already use the basic model or some other kind of model. It doesn't really matter what the model is. These processes are still always regulated. Then this regulation involves some requirements related to secure development, and there are typical vulnerabilities that cannot be allowed in a certain code. There are also matters related to commits, for example. These requirements and this methodology is just spread onto the contractor, and it doesn't matter whether this process is done by you or by the internal or the external contractor. You will not accept the results of work if the code does not meet the requirements that are adopted in your company. I don't think this is complicated. Of course, there are some particular aspects related to situations when you do the end-to-end development, but it's a different matter. I absolutely agree with you. This is how it is, indeed. Taking into account the particularities of our work, we involve contractors for certain components of the third or the second level of danger as per our model. But it has been mentioned now that if the developer touches upon the backdoor, it doesn't matter whether he is inside or outside. Same about the code. We work according to the same procedures, but there are some legal aspects and there are some differences naturally, and every organization has its own particularities in that respect, including our organization. But in general, when we get the code, it is our code. And legally speaking, this is our code as well. That is why we treat it as our code. At the same time, there is another interesting point related to external developers, because they come from the external perimeter. And before 2019 and after the pandemic, so to say, or during the pandemic, because we are still in the middle of it, but judging by the number of masks that I can see here today, it seems that it is over already. So now there are some access identifiers that were not previously used. So your developers are in the situation when, in fact, they are external ones, so they just get access to your system from the outside. And that gave rise to many interesting things. Take our company, for example. We learned that some people are not actually in Russia. There was a couple of incidents when a person tried to access the system from outside Russia. It's not a VPN, it's just that the person could not return to Russia after the vacation, and that created an alert in the security system naturally. Did you feel any difference? Perhaps some risks were revealed, taking into account that people started to work remotely. Were there any incidents? Because I think that sometimes there are too many metrics. Sometimes we do too much, because in reality, it may be not so dangerous. Well, in reality, it is really awful. The reality is very dangerous indeed. Of course, everyone has a different picture, but you have raised a good point. Before we were talking about the resistance of developers, but actually there is no resistance, really. Everyone agrees. But now, with the pandemic, we started to implement more rigid solutions, and people did not feel those restrictions before. And there was a huge resistance due to that, naturally, because we are telling them, either you have to go to the office or you can work remotely, but in that particular way. And this does trigger people's resistance. People start to complain. Even before, when we implemented secure development features, and I have to say that our company is young, we've been there since 2016 only, and some people came, they haven't faced that before, and they were asking, why does it work like that in your company? It's not the way I'm used to working. So yes, there is some resistance, and the pandemic gave rise to it once again, naturally. If it's not a secret, were there any security incidents? It's a secret. Okay, agreed. First of all, as a digitalization expert answering to a security officer, I can tell you that sometimes, yes, you are overreacting a bit. You know, legal people and security people, I believe, have to understand, first of all, what are we trying to protect ourselves against before spending money and before taking those decisions. Speaking about the pandemic, I also have to say, and I cannot not say that, the pandemic had actually a good impact. You said that you had a lot of resistance, and in our company, on the contrary, for quite a long time we deployed those remote accesses, and then the pandemic came, and after that, in basically 1 month, or for some features in 2 months, we deployed the solutions that we had been discussing and trying to agree upon for months and for years. So the pandemic was a good trigger for that and a huge impetus. And of course, I'm very grateful to our security people who allowed us to do that with all due security. I agree with you, but I meant a different thing. So imagine that you deploy this remote work. We have all read about it in books. We imagine how it will be, but you are developing it and deploying it, taking into account some restrictions and some aspects. And those restrictions, even the simplest ones, may seem really uncomfortable for people. Colleagues, I'm sorry, but like that we will move on to discussing biometric data, and we agreed that we will not do that. So allow me to make us digress from that subject a little bit. What's interesting for me is to understand the following thing. We are all now at different stages because we do different products. Some do internal products, some of you sell products, some of you do security products, and so on. So we use various approaches. It may be agile, waterfall, DCOps, BSIM, and so on, many frameworks. So my question is, how do you think? In your company, there are probably different approaches. And can you share your experience very briefly? What are the problems related to a particular framework? Are there areas where agile doesn't work, but waterfall works well, and so on? Well, that's a very broad question, but I will try to answer it. So problems are quite various indeed, and as for the most relevant ones, we started reflecting upon measures, practices, what we implement, why we do that, and we came to the conclusion that we don't really understand how it works. When we consider secure development narrowly, when we consider the code and the vulnerabilities in the code, we do not understand how exactly it will work, because my department does one bit, another department does another bit of security. So there are various bits and pieces, and the question is how to bring it all together and how to have a big picture and a comprehensive view. What are the measures that would be necessary and how to implement those measures correctly? We don't have an understanding of that, and we do not understand how to build the process in such a way so that we can see all those weak spots. And another point is, of course, related to the human factor, because once again, taking into account the big number of people, the big number of processes and applications, we don't always have the opportunity to understand what is happening in every particular application. We can just assess probabilities, we can do some spot checks, but there is still a need in a comprehensive audit of some individual systems, because developers do write the code, and they have to take responsibility for that. This methodology claims shift left. That means that we have to shift everything to developers. But developers are now being attacked from all the sides, from businesses. They're being attacked by security, and they don't really want to be solicited like that. So I believe that this is yet another issue, and resolving it will help us answer the first question: when do we really need those measures? Let me say a couple of things about agile and waterfall. Look, I think that here we speak about different measures. In any case, all of that has to be included into the development process, and it's a matter of how it is done. Even if we take agile, there are still such things as agreeing upon architecture, developing security architecture, and this is done usually once and for all. This is done once for a long cycle, and then there are some sprints that added and that are integrated into the process. Then there is testing of every one of these sprints, and yes, we do have some control points for security, but still, you agree upon the architecture one time and then you live on it. The next big revision will only happen if there are some major changes, or if there are some changes in the infrastructure, if some new features are deployed, and so on. It is very much related to the previous question about the ordered development. If it's not outstaffing, and by the way, for outstaffing, the process is nearly the same as in case of internal development. But if you have to organize a tender, a contest, and then the winner has to work according to the terms of reference that includes all the major points, it's a different story. But in addition to that, no one rules out that some things will have to be added after the application is released. I think that this is a bit of a rhetorical question. At some level of maturity, the company understands that it can use any resources, be it waterfall or agile. We can use everything at the same time. It reminds me about this picture about explaining what a DevOps is, and there is a picture illustrating that with a penguin and an elephant, and about how to merge them together. And the penguin was the administrator, I remember. The name of our subject is secure development as part of digitalization. And if we speak about secure development, I don't think that we should speak about waterfall. Agile is a different story, of course. And if we remember the cascade model, why would I need a secure code if it is a cascade development? First of all, I prepare terms of reference, then I do the code, then I see some breaches in that code, and I get 2,000 remarks, and I have to put it in the product backlog once again, and I think that I will fix it sometime in a year. But I understand that I cannot do much about that. If you work according to Agile, you will be able to integrate it into your process. Yes, we do the shift left, and we get a secure code by the time of development. We can just integrate it, and we do the continuous integration, and this is the only way to proceed. Now, speaking about problems, I noticed a small contradiction. Indeed, there is some resistance, and I think that this is one of the main issues that we are facing. Why do we have it? Because we need to explain people why we need this kind of code. We need to discuss the rules beforehand. Many people don't really understand the purpose of all of that. There are many features that are basically insecure and that can be replaced by some other features. For example, if you use call for transactions, there should be the check of authorization, and if it is not done, the feature is basically unsecure. So we need to raise awareness of people, we need to explain the rules of development. And this will resolve our problems. And it doesn't matter how you work. Do you use agile, waterfall, hybrid model, and so on? Thank you. Any other comments? Well, we're actually running out of time, so I would just like to mention, apart from agile and waterfall, which do differ in terms of development, but in terms of security methodology, they're agnostic of that. That is to say, no matter what is the methodology that you are using, you still do that security process. You also mentioned developers that have to be conscious.
Ну, сейчас является учредителем ОНО «Цифровая экономика». И там были
Our
прямо
company is the
интересные
founder
баталии на
of a
тему
digital
повышения
economy
уровня безопасности в целом
association.
в цифровой экономике России. И один из аспектов, естественно,
And there we had a discussion about the development security. And there was an HR issue discussed there. And it was very interesting to observe that among the KPIs there was the number of security engineers. At the same time, nothing was done in terms of implementing
спецкурсы по безопасной разработке. Вот это прямо
special safe development, secure development courses.
если бы у
I
нас
believe personally that if all of our developers were actually studying the special accelerated course for safe development, the cybersecurity vendors would be earning less. There would be less problems overall. You'd think.
звучало, вот это она самая. Да, давайте научим людей
Let us teach people to brush their teeth, and dentists would lose some jobs. This is pretty much the same.
Дополню немножко, вот я согласен.
If I may amend, I would agree with my colleague
Но
strongly, but
того, что нам нужно
from the point of view that we probably need to engage in a correct way, engage people in a correct way,
все мы социальные,
because we're all highly social, and when in a team out of 20 people or 10 people, 8 are saying whether you thought that you've of security here
ненормально это.
that's normal or abnormal, everyone will be finger pointing. That will be quite unpleasurable. Yes, this is a subject for another roundtable, I believe.
корпоративная культура.
Yes, corporate culture as the basis for secure development.
Про оно.
I think this is it. This is it. Yeah, thank you. As a matter of fact, I've observed this thing as well. Meaning, we've been doing teaching a lot, and we see the trend that developers and testers who understand what secure development, well, they just cost more. This is one of the requirements at the interview. People who know what skill injection, what XSS are precious. This is going to be integrated eventually, but even when the person knows about thing well, he still makes mistakes. This is just the property of human psyche. Even if you know something well, you make mistakes. That is why I'm personally sure that this is another significant way to avoid vulnerabilities, but we cannot fully avoid vulnerabilities. Yes, we can decrease the probability because your colleagues will, of course, that your colleagues will always cover for you. We're inevitably running out of time. Are there any questions from the audience? I have a question to the representative of Sberbank. Can you please tell me, are you discussing certain specifications? Are you separating development for internal services, back office, and consumer services? Depending on what sort of requirements you're talking about, specifically secure development, critical vulnerabilities, well, naturally, speaking about developers who produce software for us, our sourcers, our contractors, we define business requirements and IT security requirements. This is the general requirement. Also, as a rule, we highlight in the contract that they must test for different sorts of vulnerabilities. If we see certain problems afterwards, then we go into the details of the contract with the subcontractor. If we talk about internal development, we're doing the same thing. Business/IT security requirements, everything related to vulnerabilities is automated on the stage of DevOps conveyor. As a requirement, naturally, this is the connection to the tool, and we're testing your release on a conveyor, trying to eliminate vulnerabilities. So the software that we're getting, initially we cannot change, and all of the risks and the responsibilities are naturally transitioned on the shoulders of subcontractor. Probably no questions anymore. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, there is a question. Is there? Good. Yeah, hi there. Thank you so much for the discussion. I believe I have a couple of questions, but very different. First, there's been a large discussion about methodology, and they have been saying that all of the projects are connected to automated systems, but we do understand that not all of the programming languages are supported by automated control systems, including static and dynamic code analyzing systems. What do you do with those? What kind of compensating control you have for those systems which are not being supported by STUD, without naming any particular vendors? That's first technical question. Second question is more organizational. I appreciate the idea of culture of secure development in the company, and often today the dialogue is about how to teach developers, how to integrate analysts and developers into the culture of secure development. And there has not been enough discussion about the culture of security itself. I know it's a provocative question, but what about the mindsets of the C-suite? What do you think about that?
Давайте я начну. По первому вопросу, никто не отменяет пентест. Никто не отменяет пентест.
Nobody actually denies pen tests. I mean, we can do that in a black box. If we are saying about the second question,
Ну, в головах руководителей безопасности всегда все гораздо жестче, чем
as for C-suite, they're even more harsh. And we actually soften the requirements if the management believes that this is the direct responsibility of every developer to write secure code, and this is the responsibility of every team to make it as secure as possible. And as a controlling body, we have to do that. I believe that we have a well-established interaction with our colleagues, and we are trying our best to assist and help, understanding that it's not always that they have these competencies or understand what the matter is. I'd like to ask whether anybody wants to add, because we're actually out of time. Let me say this. I will not be answering the question, but let me introduce Sergey, who has been asking question. He's the manager of our development. Sergey, one thing, indeed, that is the duty of every developer. That is just unquestionable. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you for the discussion. I truly hope that it has been productive. Thank you. Yes, let's conclude with that.